war, prison, spying. Celebrating freedom on the 4th of July is now purely symbolic. As Americans blindly celebrate their freedom, they ignore the major areas that government has taken away some of their most valuable liberties. By Rachel Blevins, July 4, 2017. Every year on July 4, Americans celebrate their freedom on Independence Day, the anniversary of the day the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence and established the United States as an independent nation in 1776. As Americans prepare to commemorate Independence Day in 2017, gathering together with friends and family to eat, drink and watch elaborate fireworks displays, they are blindly celebrating a false sense of freedom based on a list of liberties that are far from the current practices of the U.S. government. Endless taxes. When school children in the U.S. learn about the Great American Revolution, they are taught about the important role taxes played in the decision to rebel against the British government. American colonists fought back against the unnecessary taxes and tariffs that seemed to increase by the year, and they took a stand against the heinous idea of taxation without representation. Advertisement. However, today the U.S. federal tax code is around 75,000 pages so long that most of the politicians who have the authority to push for legal change to it, have never actually read it. In fact, the Washington Examiner reported in April 2016 that the current version of the federal tax code is more than 187 times longer than it was a century ago. Amazingly, in the first 26 years of the federal income tax, the tax code only grew from 400 to 504 pages. Even through President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, the tax code was well under 1,000 pages. Changes during World War II made the length of the tax code balloon to 8,200 pages. Most of the growth in the tax code came in the past 30 years, growing from 26,300 pages in 1984 to nearly 3 times that length today. Mass incarceration. When school children in the U.S. are taught about history, they are taught about the abolishment of slavery in the 1860s, followed by the civil rights movement in the 1960s. They are taught that Americans finally learned how to appreciate all people, regardless of race. However, they are not taught about the forms of modern-day slavery, in which race and poverty play an important role. Read more. Happy 4th of July. Here are 10 ways America is number one that are no reason for celebration. A study conducted by the Brennan Center of Justice at NYU School of Law in 2016 found that nearly 40% of the U.S. prison population, around 576,000 people, are behind bars with no compelling public safety reason. More than 25% of prisoners, 364,000 people, are serving prison sentences for nonviolent offenses. Mass surveillance. The peaceful transition of power is known as one of the cornerstones of American policy, and issues such as mass surveillance appear to transcend party lines. From President Bush signing the Patriot Act, to President Obama signing the USA Freedom Act, Americans have seen an ongoing loss of privacy rights in the 21st century. While President Trump has openly praised government surveillance, he wouldn't have his current ability to spy on innocent Americans, if it wasn't for the actions of his predecessors. Just days before he left office, Obama signed an executive order that gave the National Security Agency the authority to share the raw streams of the communications it intercepts from Americans directly with government agencies such as the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. Endless war. When British colonists arrived on American soil, they acted as if they were the first to ever discover the land, and appeared to have very little regard for the Native American people who were already inhabitants. The only war that was waged was for a land the American colonists chose to claim as their own. In many ways, that practice is still carried out today. The concept of endless war is one that has been passed from one administration to the next in the U.S., with each new president adding to and intensifying the current ongoing conflicts. Instead of pursuing a conflict because the opposing country directly attacked the U.S., the true strategy revolves around what the U.S. can stand to gain from the country's natural resources, along with the factor of whether that country recently dropped the U.S. dollar. Read more. Cash Me Outside girls Instagram hacked, used to expose America's infatuation with ignorance. While Donald Trump ran on a policy of not invading other countries, his sentiment quickly changed once he became the lead puppet for the military-industrial complex. As U.S. founding father Benjamin Franklin once said, those who would give up essential liberty, to purchase a little temporary safety, deserve neither liberty nor safety. In 2017, the current status of the United States is one in which when it comes to the areas of taxes, war, and the police and surveillance state, the American public seems to have no regard for the police state they willingly submit to, all the while openly celebrating their freedom.
I was a witness to a homicide. I have waited 4 years patiently for a just verdict. It does not appear to be forthcoming.
Tango 19. Watch 7, we're requesting SWAT team. We have shots fired, shots fired. 10-4 copy. Delta 66.
Can you call into Farmington Fire Station, have them open up one of their bay doors for me?
10-4.
G14, go ahead. Yeah, I've got eyes on the back of this truck. Let me know if you need more info.
Boss 1 Davis.
Go ahead.
Did you need negotiators also? I believe they're en route. Just need to confirm.
Affirmative.
10-4. Just 10-14, female fathers at the PD.
Hey, just 1014, you have media here. I'm just staging them where we're at on 100 East State. 701. Got a Farmington police car blocking Main Street and First North. I need them to move that so the ambulance can get through, please. 10-4. Initiate. He is down. Shot fired. He is down. Prepare for medical to move in. Stand by. We're going to secure him.
My job was pretty, I don't know how to say this, confidential. When there's a major problem behind the scenes or underground or hidden from the rest of the world, I usually know about it because I'm the person that's hired to come in and troubleshoot it, solve it, resolve it, locate the source of the problem, and correct it. Most of my work, I would say 80% of my work at least, is sewage. toilet paper, wipes, feminine products, anything that gets flushed in the toilet comes into this system and gets pumped away. People take all this for granted, but this is what happens when you crap. The fun begins. I'm about a foot deep. What I'm doing here is making it so I can extract the pump. There we go. Okay. Something got in there and wallowed out a groove, so the bearings are completely gone in that. So that's our problem. I like this job. It's a lot less stressful than being a county sheriff or a county commissioner or a politician. Actually, it's a step up from being a politician. Standing in sewage is a step up. I was the youngest sheriff to be elected in the history of the state of Utah. I was 29 years old when I was elected. I actually had to learn what a sheriff did after I was elected. But by the time I took office in January of '75, I had read everything I could get my hands on that pertained to the office and the duty and the constitutional responsibility of the sheriff of the county.
When he first filed to run for sheriff, I was devastated. Because I thought, oh my gosh, we don't have money. You'll never win. And he won that one. This picture over here is when I was in the Marine Corps, outstanding graduate. This is a police officer with Bountiful City. This is when I served as Davis County Commissioner in the mid-'80s. My campaign picture when I ran for the United States Congress in 1990, 1992, and 1994. And I lost all 3 times to Congressman Jim Hansen. This is my hangar area. I built a lot of things in here. I designed an aircraft. It took me 18 years of thinking about the perfect aircraft. I haven't worked on it a day in over 4 years. I abandoned the plane for a more pressing project. It was the investigation of the homicide death of my son-in-law. I had to find a place that nobody was aware of and operate in pretty much secrecy. This was sealed off, and I could just move one of these out of the way and make a little path to come back into my project. I started on this wall. These are actual photographs of the SWAT team officers who participated. This wall represents the sequential development of the investigation as we learned new information about the case. This has been a very difficult thing to do because of how close my relationship was to Brian. He was like a son. The tragedy changed all of our lives.
Hey, you saw Jake in the fire truck? That was my new job, one of them. And the battery died on the camera, otherwise it would have been longer. Sorry. And Jake was in some of my gear, huh?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk into the camera over there?
Yeah.
What else do you want to say before we send it?
I don't.
Huh? No. Have fun. We'll see you later, and we'll send you another one.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
"99% of the time, Brian was a kind, loving, patient person. He was stubborn. He was a take-me-as-I-am person.
My ass is so big. I can cover every state.
He overall was a very good husband and just, I think, an excellent father. But Brian did have a tendency that when something was going wrong, rather than opening up and talking about it, he would keep it within himself and let it build up until, you know, it would come out in the wrong way.
I've never seen Brian the way he was the morning of September 22nd.
Liz had gone to a church camp in Denver, Colorado.
He supported me in that and bought the ticket. But you know, it's closer to the day for me to leave and it's time for me to go, and he just gets more sad and more, you know, I don't know, you know, dogs get separation anxiety and they tear up the furniture. I came home and he was being extra quiet. You know, I mean, he just had the look. We just fought. He brought up things from 10 years ago. I mean, we fought about everything.
I've gone through it 1,000 times in my mind. In the beginning, it was a typical Monday morning. My office is only 2 blocks away from Brian's home, right here in Farmington. And as usual, one of the first things that I do is that I call Brian.
When Brian picked up the phone, he was talking to his dad, I screamed for Jerry to help me. That made Brian very angry. I did not know how powerless I was until I ran into a truly angry husband.
911 emergency?
Yeah, I just beat and raped my wife. Come get me.
You what? Hello?
When he said it, I don't know what his motivation was, other than maybe shock value. He didn't rape me. He did hurt me. He did assault me.
He had a very clear moral code himself. You know, you just don't hurt other people, anybody. And so he would have been angry at himself probably for that, frustrated. And where do you go from here?
I walked up to the door and I could tell the atmosphere was pretty heavy. You know, I could tell something was wrong.
Hello? Hi, this is the 911 operator. What's going on over there?
It's okay. His dad's here now.
It's what?
It's fine. His dad's here now. It's fine.
No, what's going on over there? I have to send somebody. What's going on over there? Is this Liz?
I don't need you to send anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody.
1075, 125 East, 100 North, 125 East, 100 North.
Brian climbed into his truck, he rolled the window up in the car, and he turned the music on. He turned it up quite loud. And he didn't want to communicate or talk. Within probably 4 or 5 minutes, there were 2 police officers that pulled up in their patrol cars. He had 2 handguns. He rolled down the passenger side window. He took one of the pistols and he did fire a round into the plywood next to the truck. It was just his way of saying that I do have weapons and they are loaded. And I knew at that point that we have kind of a serious situation.
Tango 19, Block 7, we're requesting SWAT team. We have shots fired, shots fired. 10-4, copy.
When I ran the first time for public office in 1974, I walked from door to door. Liz was on my back in a backpack and helped me campaign. And a lot of people voted for me. They didn't know me, they didn't know much about me, but they voted for the guy with the little girl on his back in a backpack. Liz is my oldest daughter, and I've always been really protective of her. Immediately after the event of the 22nd of September 2008, I was worried about Liz's safety. I was very angry at Brian. When I realized that he had assaulted Liz, I was angry and I was upset, and I was for a long time. And I fully expected that Brian would have been convicted and gone to jail. I have no problems with that because that's justice. I do feel that he did not deserve to die.
There would have been, and should have been, legal consequences.
Since this week's SWAT standoff in Farmington ended with the death of a man, a lot of people have been asking questions about how police standoffs should be handled.
Some are supportive of the police actions. Others wonder whether Brian Wood really had to die.
Dr. Mark Zalig is a forensic psychologist and spent 25 years as a Salt Lake City police officer. He says more than 80% of standoff situations end safely.
By and large, the methodology and the system that police departments are using now are fairly sound.
Police use tear gas, stun grenades, pepper balls, possibly even a taser, before Wood is eventually shot by a Davis County Sheriff's deputy.
Six days of rioting in a Negro section of Los Angeles left behind scenes reminiscent of war-torn cities.
The origin of the SWAT team you can trace back to 1965 with the Watts riots. These were unlike any riots the country had ever seen before. They were much more militant. They weren't confined to one part of the city. Daryl Gates was an inspector at LAPD and was in charge of LAPD's response to the Watts riots. And Gates was troubled by the way his department responded to the riots. And so his idea was that LAPD needed an equally militaristic response to that. And comes up with this idea of assembling this very elite team of police officers who are highly trained, very specialized, who could respond quickly and overwhelmingly to these kinds of emergency situations. And the idea was to use violence to diffuse an already violent scenario. First raid comes in 1969 against a Black Panther holdout.
The intermittent warfare between the Black Panthers and police erupted today in Los Angeles.
The next high-profile raid comes a few years later against the Symbionese Liberation Army.
5 suspected members of the Symbionese Liberation Army are dead.
The whole country was kind of watching this as one of the big tabloid crime stories at the time. This whole thing was nationally televised, and that raid really kind of propels SWAT into the mass culture. You get a SWAT TV show, SWAT board games and lunch boxes, and the SWAT team really becomes a part of domestic law enforcement.
Across the country, things in the early 70s were changing. Things were happening that were much more violent. I went to Los Angeles and studied right where it originated. And it just seemed to be the proper thing to do at the time. I started the SWAT team in Davis County in 1975. The intent was noble. The intent was to have the capability, the weaponry, the training, the ability to neutralize or diffuse violent situations. As I stood there and watched and witnessed what went down on the 22nd of September, I knew how they should be conducting their operations. I knew procedure, the protocol, tactical approaches that would be effective. I was disappointed. But at the same time, I consistently comforted my family members. I explained to Jerry, they're professional, they know what they're doing, we have to trust them.
All of us really trusted law enforcement. No one had the inclination that it would end the way it did.
I went over it and over it in my head because it didn't make sense the way it went down. I have been an investigator for 45 years. When I initially started out as a police officer, I spent a lot of time on patrol investigating traffic accidents. I took a real interest in reconstructing crime scenes. I worked on some fairly high-profile cases as a police officer. We actually broke the Ted Bundy case at Viewmont High School with the homicide death of Debbie Kent. And after I left law enforcement, I was called upon a number of times to assist lawyers, law firms, insurance companies in reconstructing accidents. I've investigated drug cases, robberies, homicides, accidental deaths, suicides. Have investigated at least 125 major felony cases. Over a period of time, through the Records Access Management Act and under Freedom of Information Act, we were able to obtain evidence that the police had in their possession. We received 1,100 pages of documents. Of those 1,100 pages, there were that many pages. There's over 300 pages that are redacted. They cut out what they didn't want us to see. I've kind of reconstructed a lot of things here. We placed this exactly the way it was because we have it photographed. I took custody of this scene at 7 o'clock on the 23rd, which was 22 hours after Brian was killed. I was astonished. I was able to direct an investigation right from the beginning and get fresh evidence before it was tainted. That's unheard of. The police did not do a thorough investigation. I recovered 14 rounds. I recovered 7 37mm gas rounds that the police discarded. I recovered black impact rounds, blue rubber foam rounds. Numerous pieces of evidence were left by the police. There was a total of 111 rounds fired by the police, counting the tasers, the explosive devices, flashbang grenades, pepper ball rounds, 2 lethal rounds, and we traced 94 of the 111 from point of firing all the way through everything they touched until they were recovered. And either the police have them in evidence or we have them in evidence. After 2 years and 7 months, the family was able to get a copy of the video that was actually taken by the police. I bought a computer, and those 2 poll camera videos, I was able to put on the computer, download them, and began looking at them very, very carefully. As I learned more and began to piece together the puzzle, I spent more and more time doing this. I spent hours. I'd come in from work every evening and work till midnight. Sometimes I'd work all night. But it became an obsession, and the more I learned, the more it drew me into trying to find the truth. Immediately following the altercation in the house, Brian went out the back door, came around the house, and came and got in his truck. His father followed him out and stopped by the mirror and is standing right here by the door. Jerry is threatened by the police. They threatened to arrest him for interfering, for obstructing justice, felony charges if he didn't move away from the truck.
After a certain length of time, I finally decided I have to trust them. I've got to trust them. I've got to walk away from this, and they're going to resolve this situation, and we'll move forward.
The police officer that was in here with us took Jacob and myself, and we had to go out through the backyard, through the neighbor's fence. And my aunt took me to the doctor, and then I came home from the doctor, and I went to sleep because they gave me some drugs. And I slept most of the afternoon, and I had no idea. Nobody told me that anything
Meanwhile, officers have moved into the house. They don't have a warrant and the house is unoccupied, but the Farmington officer unlocks the front door and lets the SWAT team officers in the house. They cut the screens on the kitchen window. They kick out the screens in the living room window.
There were officers everywhere. They were on the other side of the fence. They were inside the house. They were on the roof of houses and the fire department across the street. They've got 80 police officers. They've got highway patrolmen. They've got Bountiful Police. They've got Davis County Sheriff Department. They've got the Farmington City, Kaysville. They got the Salt Lake SWAT team. It's just unbelievable. They've got a helicopter in the air. And during this time, now Brian is not in any way pointing the gun at any persons except himself.
The first assault begins after 3 or 4 hours as Brian is convinced it's useless. He agrees to surrender and actually opens the door, starts to step out of the vehicle. And at that point, the command center tells the officers here, no, do not let him out the driver's side. Take him out the passenger side. They don't tell him anything. They just open fire with a 40-millimeter impact round that's fired from the living room window, and it hits the window right here and blows out his window. And the first thing he does is, he flips him the bird, and they open fire from the kitchen window. They blow out the back windows and struck him in the side of the neck. And so Brian goes down. Instead of surrendering and getting out, he is now injured and incapacitated in the vehicle. It takes them over an hour to allow him to recover enough to follow instructions.
I mean, a chunk of the headrest was torn off. And these are the non-lethal weapons.
I was told that the Davis County District Attorney relayed the message to him that he had committed 5 felonies and that he would be spending the next 20 years in prison. To try to calm the situation down by telling him he had already committed 5 felonies and that he was going to spend the next 20 years in prison, it didn't seem to me to be a very tactful position. I kept telling them, let me talk to Brian. I know I can calm this situation down. They said, absolutely not. They were in control and they were going to handle the situation. All of a sudden, you see this mentality of aggression that is just overwhelming. And once this machine started going in that direction, there didn't seem to be any way to reverse it, change its direction, or slow it down. It seemed to go into more of a military operation at that time.
The SWAT team decide to force him out of the vehicle. They run all the way up to the tree within 4 feet of the window and toss a flashbang that blows up right on by the mirror and shoot 3 rounds of gas into the back seat area. Brian then gets out of the vehicle, and from 3:30 in the afternoon, he stands right here with a phone to his ear and a gun to his head.
Why? Why did this happen? Who's making these decisions?
These are our command vehicle. We have a bomb vehicle, and you have a bomb containment device over here in the corner. About the closest thing we have to being the militarization of our police force is this Humvee that we picked off of our military surplus. When people fall and break their leg or anything, we use this vehicle to be able to get way back into the woods and be able to load them up onto a stoke stretcher and get back out of there where normal trucks just can't get to.
Do you have the Bearcat in here? We
do have a Bearcat. He's out on training right now with it, so.
Seems to be a popular vehicle.
Yeah.
Last time I was here, it was that.
Yeah, it gets utilized. It's designed to carry multiple officers.
Armored military vehicles are all over Utah. This steel Bearcat is at the Davis County Sheriff's Department, but used around the region. Sheriff Todd Richardson says that vehicles like these are used to protect officers, not to intimidate.
You have kind of this perception out there that it's the militarization of law enforcement. It's really me as a sheriff asking a deputy to go into a situation where there's a high probability somebody will get shot. And me as a sheriff preparing that individual with all the tools that I can give him to keep him safe to go handle that situation. And that's, if you want to call that militarization, then that's what it is.
The premise that the cops are becoming more like the military. It is false. In fact, it is an altered reality. The opposite is true. The military has learned from the police, and it is very evident in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where they've had to go into these communities and be part of the community and still function. The reality is SWAT teams save lives, demonstratably. Many of our weapon systems are saving lives. The taser, great tool, vilified in many places around the country as an unnecessary use of force and overly dangerous. I personally have seen it save the lives of youth and others because it's allowed us to not use deadly force. So our tactics, I think, have improved and improved the safety of our community.
Since my family became victims, I've watched more intently than ever the other people like us who have suffered as victims, who have to deal with the loss of a loved one, a family member in this case. And I find we're not alone. There are hundreds and hundreds of people across the country. It's happening several times every day.
Whiskey 7. Whiskey 7, we're at 3268 Jackson. We got shots fired. We got officer hit. I need medical. I need additional units.
On January 4, 2012 at 8:40 p.m., officers from the Weber Morgan Narcotics Strike Force were attempting to serve a search warrant at 3268 Jackson Avenue in Ogden. During the service of the warrant, 6 police officers as well as 1 suspect were shot and were taken to local hospitals. The Ogden City Police Department regretfully announces that Agent Jared Frankham succumbed to injuries sustained as a result of this incident. Agent Frankham has served the citizens of Ogden with honor for 7 years. He is survived by his wife and 2 young children. The suspect remains at a local hospital under guard with non-life-threatening injuries. The suspect's name is Matthew David Stewart.
This was a picture he took when he was up at Waterfall Canyon. He liked to climb. He loved the outdoors, and he loved hiking. He used to go up with his little sister. I don't believe that for 1 minute Matthew knew that it was the police that was breaking into his home. They hid their vehicles across the street by the church. They snuck over in single file, being very quiet, to not alert neighbors for fear that they would possibly call the resident and warn them. They had long hair, some of them. They had beards. They worked undercover. They wore black clothing, Levi's. You know, they weren't in police uniforms. There were no police cars with the lights in front of the house to let somebody know that, hey, you know, we have a search warrant. I think his training kicked in.
Matthew was a communications specialist in the military. He was also airborne. It kind of took me a while to actually even meet Matthew because he was very withdrawn. My relationship with Matthew specifically started growing when he lost his job at the IRS and we got him a job with us at Walmart. Matthew and I worked the graveyard shift together, so we would go into work at 10 p.m. and we would get off work at 7 a.m. Had they waited one more hour, Matthew would have been out on the driveway waiting for us to pick him up for work. None of this had to happen.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
In 1970, 1971, we have Nixon declaring war on drugs. Nixon comes up with this idea of the no-knock raid. Federal narcotics officers across the entire country, they use it gladly and often. They start conducting these mass raids, sometimes without warrants, terrorizing people, getting the wrong houses. The SWAT teams are spreading across the country, but they're still being used only in these emergency-type situations. It really isn't until the Reagan administration that the two trends converge.
We can defeat this enemy.
Reagan had taken Nixon's drug war metaphor and made it very literal.
37 federal agencies are working together in a vigorous national effort. And by next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
You start to see SWAT teams used primarily to serve search warrants on people suspected of drug crimes.
Police search warrant! Police search warrant! Search warrant! Search warrant! Don't move!
The war on drugs federally has produced a lot of money that's then trickled down to communities. You see this heavy degree of new tools and weapons and things being given to police officers, but the outcome of that is that you change from the blue-shirted police officer to the battle-hardened, battle gear-laden police officer who looks more like a military officer ready to fight against an enemy.
Police search warrant! Don't move! Don't move!
The use of paramilitary policing tactics is not new. And in fact, in some communities, in particular poor communities of color, it's been going on for decades.
Particularly for people who are disproportionately affected by these policies, there's an increased tension that's going to build up, and a lot of times that can only hit its climax and result in extra violence that otherwise wouldn't be there. Introducing aggressive tactics and militarized tactics and weapons into an already volatile situation has a tendency to increase that cycle where the community becomes more tense and tends to react more violently, so the police react more violently against them, and it's a self-perpetuating circle.
In the 1990s, Congress created a program that's administered by the Defense Department that we refer to as the 1033 program. And this is a program that authorizes the U.S. military to give away to police departments military equipment, essentially free of charge, to the local police departments. And that program has a built-in requirement that a police department that receives equipment from the U.S. military has to use it within 1 year.
Police officers are receiving military vehicles and uniforms and weapons and equipment, and they're being told they're fighting a war on drugs, they're being told they're fighting a war on terror. When you dress them up and you give them that mandate and you give them that mindset, it's not a surprise that they start acting in a militaristic way.
If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it stands to reason that if the federal government is giving police departments an arsenal of military weaponry, they're going to use it. Tragically, there are so many incidents of the use of deadly force across the country.
What we see is just this massive, massive increase in the use and number of SWAT teams. In the late 70s, there were a few hundred SWAT raids per year across the entire country. By the early 80s, we were up to about 3,000 per year. And by 2005, we're up to about 50,000 SWAT raids per year. So you're looking at about a 1,500% increase since the early 80s and a 15,000% increase since the late 1970s. The vast, vast majority of that increase is not because we have had a massive increase in hostage takings or active shooter situations. In fact, violent crime is down quite a bit. It's because we started using these tactics as an investigative tool to serve search warrants to collect evidence against people suspected of drug crimes.
There are certainly cases in which it's not only appropriate but absolutely necessary for the police to use some form of paramilitary weapons and tactics, like hostage, barricade, and active shooter scenarios. But there needs to be proportionality.
We've really come a long way, and it's happened very gradually, which is why I think people haven't noticed and why I think there's never really been, any sort of public debate or public discussion about this. There was never, Congress never was ever going to vote tomorrow on whether or not we should militarize police, right? It's been an amalgamation of policies that have had this kind of gradual eroding effect on these principles that got us where we are today.
I work a lot. I use every day doing everything I can to stay busy, to stay occupied, because work is that's my medication, that's my therapy.
I would term it obsessive. And I think the obsession is more with trying to make wrong things right, and obsession is probably a good word. And I just recognize it as that. And so I'm fine as long as he doesn't need me to be there with him. But I think he has a very keen sense of being fair. Everyone should abide by the law in the same way.
The proudest act that I've ever committed as a police officer was in 1972. This central Utah city of 27,000 people is so honest that when a police officer breaks a traffic law, he makes sure that he gives himself a ticket. Or at least that is what policeman William Lawrence did after he parked his patrol car near an ice cream parlor and walked in to order a milkshake. A woman told him he had illegally parked. "We get citations for such violations," she said. "You're right," Mr. Lawrence replied, and walked outside and wrote himself a parking ticket. That kind of set a tone for my whole entire police career. I am obsessed with the idea of peace officer being a trusted friend, a qualified, trained peacemaker. And that's possible. I heard about the Matthew David Stewart case. I took an interest in it. Mike Stewart told me that the police had released the residence where all of this went down. I asked him if we could be there when he made the first entry into the home.
Let me just grab the doors for you guys. I can't imagine what it would have been like for my son and those 6 or 7 officers that were in this house. Can you imagine 6 people and 200 bullets or 150 bullets going off into this little place? The shock of it all. I cannot imagine how anybody even survived.
Dee, what kind of charges is this man facing now at this point?
I'd like to comment on that, but until we have the investigation complete, I'm not going to say exactly what he's facing, but it appears right now, the information that we have an aggravated murder, as well as a number of attempted aggravated murders.
This medal here was a medal of valor, and this was a medal awarded by Roy City Police Department for the night of January 4th. This is a Purple Heart medal that was awarded by the Strike Force, again for the night of January 4th, and then this was the Medal of Honor awarded again for the night of January 4th. I'm not proud of that fact that myself, along with the other agents, had to be in a position where somebody felt that we should receive these. I received information from a person that called in stating that there was a marijuana grow at the location. My initial response was to just go knock on the door. I actually attempted to make contact on the front door. Nobody answered, so we just came around to the south side here to knock on this door. And this is obviously what's left of the door after it was breached. But when it was closed and we had a clear, unobstructed view down into the stairwell, but just looking down here, we saw a really, really bright light emitting from the bottom of that stairwell. Also, through this window here, we could again see multiple stacks of the water bottles, or excuse me, the water containers, 2 to 2.5 gallon jugs, which we know through our training and experience, you have to have some type of water source to cultivate marijuana. We also, there was that vegetation stick, which was fabricated and whittled for a device used to prop vegetation. Based upon that information, based upon the probable cause that we saw at the location, I was able to write up an affidavit and present it to a magistrate. It took probably about 10 minutes for the judge to read through the search warrant and decide right then and there if it's enough probable cause to obtain a search warrant or not.
Guy was ready to leave, to go home. Agent Vanderwerf said no, he's finishing up the warrant and he should have it approved here pretty soon if it gets approved. We parked in the church right across the street. We get out, we approach the house, walk up the driveway up to the side door right there.
At that point, it wasn't a knock and announce, so I just positioned myself up to the door and just started pounding on it repeatedly. It was long enough to allow a reasonable person in this house to hear this door and come answer it.
Everyone looks at Agent Vanderwerf and says, we've given him enough time to open the door if anyone's in there. Agent Frankham hits the door just gets shattered.
I let in, and I came directly down the stairs.
Half the team that goes in goes straight downstairs. Half the team goes upstairs. I'm in the half that goes upstairs. Kitchen's very small. You can see that it's clear. So we continue north through the kitchen. I'm right behind Agent Grogan. Agent Grogan kind of posts up at the half wall. Have my hand on his back. I feel him move from my hand, so I turn to look to see where he went. I just see a gun come from around the corner, and I see a big flash.
This door over here where the grow was at was breached. And I specifically remember Agent Hansen, Tyler, said, "There's your grow." And for a second I thought, oh, wow, that's great, because that's what we anticipated, that's what we came here to do. And then it was right here that I heard the first wave of gunshots upstairs. I remember looking at one of my agents. We kind of locked eyes on each other like, are we really hearing what we're hearing?
Whiskey 7, we're at 3268 Jackson. We got shots fired. We got officer hit. I need medical. I need additional units. Medical stage. Stand by.
I just let my knees buckle, trying to fall down as fast as I can. Boom, boom, I see 2 more flashes. As I'm falling to the ground, I can feel the bullets go right through my hair. I just pull the trigger as fast as I can. I don't count how many rounds I've fired or anything. I'm watching my rounds hit the wall, and then the gun gets pulled back into the room, disappears. Grogan's laying down in front of me, and he has a hand over his face, and I said, "Are you okay?" He moves his hand, and all I do is see this big hole in his face. And he just leans over, and just all this blood starts coming out of his mouth.
You said you felt like you needed to defend yourself. What were you defending yourself from?
Just a bunch of guys breaking in.
Did you have any idea who those guys were?
No, I just heard yelling and window breaking.
Tell me what you did with the gun. How did you defend yourself?
I pointed it around the corner to keep them back. And that's when they unloaded.
Okay.
I saw dust and wood fragments flying everywhere. And I hadn't pulled the trigger. And that's when I felt like they were definitely there to kill me.
Did you pull the trigger on your weapon?
After they unloaded theirs on me.
After they unloaded.
Then I tried to shoot down the hallway to keep them back. But I wasn't so focused on that because I was already hit.
Where were you hit?
In the arm right here.
Do you know now who the people coming in your house were?
Not specifically. Who were they? You've got a lot of branches out there.
Branches of what?
Branches of the government.
Were you walking back and forth in your kitchen while you were shooting at the officers? Matthew.
I think this is the point I'm going to need a lawyer.
Agent Frankham, he had been laying suppressive fire down so the other agents could clear out of there. Agent Frankham indicated that he was out. Matthew Stewart took advantage of that. He came down the hall and began shooting just Hail Mary through the walls. We had blood all over.
I can hear in the background just at the house, just shots being fired. Boom. Boom. That's all I'm hearing. Boom.
I need 2 units up here at 33rd and Jackson. Help us move these wounded officers over to the intersection, and we need medical to evac now.
I kind of run over to the door. I see Sergeant Hutchinson's laying on his back with Agent Frankham laying on top of him. And I just grab Frankham, and he just says, "I'm hit bad. I need help. You know, you need to get me to a hospital quick," or something to that effect. And I set him down, and he just, like he just dies.
Where, if they entered the doorway?
Well, they come through the side door.
Some went down, and some went up.
I think
where was Matthew?
3 went down, 3 went up.
Where was
Matthew? So you come into this hallway. I don't know. This was the bathroom. The door's missing. This is a hallway closet that has bullet holes going every which way. But Matthew was in this room. He probably would have been in this position right here, because when he heard them come in, you know, he was trying to see who it was. That's when they had said that an arm had come around the corner from this direction.
Well, now, this is an exit here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You got 2 bullets going in here.
Yeah.
You got an officer there standing there.
They're firing through the wall.
Somebody is.
At what they think he's right here in the hallway. So this one was fired from here. That is a weird angle. You see straight through them. This is going into the bathroom. Look where there's an officer in this bathroom that supposedly gets hit. 2 bullets are fired that come straight from the kitchen into this bathroom. If there's an officer in here when those bullets are fired, it's likely that he was shot right here by friendly fire.
There's better ways to serve warrants than using violence and a tumultuous entry, because that's exactly what happened here. And You know, nobody saw anybody, and a whole lot of shooting went on, and people got, you know, one person killed, 5 wounded, some seriously. My son seriously wounded. You know what, they can't answer the question. What were they protecting us from?
Militarization is not just SWAT teams, it's also the mindset. It's this idea that, you know, it's perfectly appropriate to storm somebody's house at night for plants, you know, and there wasn't even, you know, any evidence that he was dealing. I mean, this was all his own personal use stuff.
5 pounds of marijuana in the freezer and 15 or 16 plants, that's a lot of marijuana. I don't know what his plan ultimately was, but there was no evidence that we had of him selling it to anyone from that house or on the street.
Why is it that people have made the decision, and especially lawmakers, when did a bust become more important than people's lives?
The police are creating these circumstances. They're creating the volatility, they're creating the violence, they're creating the very thin margin for error. Is it appropriate that 100 to 150 times a day in this country we send cops armed like soldiers barreling into people's homes, usually at night, to enforce consensual, nonviolent crimes? Like, is that an appropriate government action? Is that an appropriate use of force?
Peel the screen, eh?
Police search warrant! Police search warrant! Search warrant! Search warrant! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Clear this house.
In that clip, you can see him in the dark of night shouting, "Police search warrant," announcing right as they then invade the home.
Police search warrant!
They enter the home, turn immediately to the left, where you can see there's a lit hallway, and you see an individual brandishing something, and you can't immediately detect what it is, but you can see that he's holding something up. And yet within just milliseconds, you see an officer fire 3 rounds into the chest of Blair, who then immediately drops.
Get on the ground!
It was a golf club that he was holding up, thinking he was being invaded. That officer who shot Blair, he put 3 rounds and later said that he suspected it might have been a sword. He saw that it was a shiny object, and he was justified later by the prosecutor in his use of force.
Hey, he's not conscious, doesn't appear to be breathing.
Not conscious, doesn't appear to be breathing.
When the police make a mistake in one of these cases and shoot someone who isn't really a threat, they're always forgiven because it's the volatility of the situation. You know, a reasonable person in the officer's position could have, you know, made the same mistake. The people on the receiving end of these raids aren't given that consideration, right? You're woken up in the middle of the night to armed men in your house, breaking into your house, and you're supposed to wake up and immediately conclude that the armed men in your home are police officers and not, you know, armed criminals there to kill you. And if you make a mistake and, you know, reach for a gun, reach for anything to defend yourself, you're done. I mean, you're probably going to die. And if you do manage to get some shots off and do manage to survive the next 4 or 5 seconds, you're probably going to go to jail for the rest of your life.
What you need to look at when we're doing these evaluations is, would a reasonable and prudent police officer take the threat that he's receiving and react to it the way that he did? He has to make a decision in a matter of seconds, and that decision that he makes will hang with him and be evaluated by multiple people for years to come. And as such, I can only see from the outside looking in that his evaluation was that he was going to receive a threat of serious bodily injury to himself or somebody else, and he neutralized that threat.
You will find situations where officers are justified in taking the life of someone that is unarmed. The reality is that the circumstances oftentimes are so dynamic that whether they are armed or not is not the question. The question is what is the perception of the officer at the time? The average shooting, there's just no opportunity, nor do we want to train officers to take that extra 15 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever that time frame is, to make these kinds of determination. Because remember, in their mind, the whole reason they're using deadly force is you're about to kill me or someone else. There's not enough time.
If you have a raid where an innocent, unarmed person gets killed, and the conclusion is that A, none of the officers involved in the raid violated any department policy, and B, none of the policies themselves need to be changed, the only conclusion you can draw from that is that it's perfectly acceptable for unarmed, innocent people to be killed during drug raids. I mean, that's the only conclusion you can come to. And that's, you know, on its face, an absurd conclusion, and should tell you that something in that process, one of those steps, is wrong.
This is a project, Woods Cross High School Greenhouse Project. They've been trying for 2 years to get a greenhouse that would actually grow plants without dying from lack of water. What we're going to do is show you that with the pressure that we have and the volume that you have, you can completely cover the table with plenty of volume, plenty of water. All it takes is a little bit of knowledge of physics and using what you got and doing the best that you can with what little you got to work with. It's very rewarding to me to do the job as thoroughly as it can possibly be done, to learn every truth that can be learned. And go through here. Move it out away from the wall. Right there. See how it's lining up over there? The red represents the rounds that were fired by the police officers, and the yellow represents the rounds fired by the suspect. We got a gun battle going on right here, and what we're doing is reconstructing who fired from where. There's an entry. There's a hole.
Look.
Yeah, there's a bullet. Oh, there's that bullet. This is a bullet that hit somebody. Preserve this, we will mark it. How about that? They spent a year and 10 months in here, and at least, you know, and they missed.
All it takes is a crazy chick to find it.
They missed it.
The question is, are the laws valid? Are they legitimate that create these circumstances with the Todd Blairs and the Matthew David Stewarts and others who are then put in the position of conflict with police officers, where police officers, rightly or wrongly, feel threatened? The problem isn't so much the police officers themselves as it is the system and the laws that they're then enforcing. The issue is that we're criminalizing the simple possession and ingestion of drugs, and then we're authorizing mass quantities of violence to go in and punish people who do that.
Danielle had a very bright personality. She was always so happy. She made other people happy. I lived in this little bubble. I liked my little bubble. I stayed in my little bubble that kept me safe. But now, my eyes are open and I see it now. There's no way to close them again.
Police claim that their lives were in danger when they opened fire, killing an unarmed woman.
2 detectives claimed they watched Danielle Willard make a drug buy and then drive off. They allegedly watched her pull over and take the drugs when they came up to her car.
Your heart's racing, you're scared, you see 2 people you don't know that have guns pulled out at you and you don't know why. You're gonna just bolt.
Miss Willard put the vehicle in reverse and backed out of the parking stall. As this was occurring, Detective Callie was struck by the vehicle, and both Detective Callie and Salmon fired their service weapons.
When I found out she was dead, I couldn't breathe. I think about it right now, and in the pit of my stomach, those words keep coming back to me, that Danielle's dead. And as the words keep coming back to me, every time I hear it, it's still not real. I go and I see her at the morgue. It's my baby girl. It's my baby girl.
You can see the wheels. Some faint marks are still here showing the angle of the front wheels, and you can see faintly the rear wheels of the Subaru, left rear, right rear here. So tracing that bullet through the holes in the windshield and out the hole in the rear window, it actually is pointed in the direction of the corner of the building. So we're going to search an area that's 10 feet high and 10 feet low, 30 feet wide, and we should find that bullet somewhere. Melissa asked me to help them learn anything about the case. They knew nothing. They kept it, it was totally closed to any knowledge whatsoever. The police released nothing. The press knew nothing. Nobody knew anything about that case, and everybody was digging, trying to find out what they could about how and why this happened to her 21-year-old daughter. Now let me have you back up a little bit and let me show you what the evidence shows happened. This officer fired 2 shots from approximately this location right here. The medical examiner said they were fired from an intermediate distance. That means that it's 6 or 8 feet or longer. Intermediate. It's not close enough to get powder. There was no residue on her body. It wasn't close to the window. There's no evidence to show that it was close, which means he was a safe distance from the vehicle that's supposedly running him down.
The militarization of policing is really cultural, and we saw a number of examples of training documents in which it really appeared that the police were being trained to think of themselves as soldiers and of the people that they're supposed to be serving as enemies.
I know something's wrong. I knew it in my gut to begin with. And I told everybody I will not stop until these officers are in prison.
Even though it was clearly a homicide, her life was taken unnecessarily, under Utah law, it will be very difficult to overcome the law which gives the police protection, its immunity. If they acted under color of law, if they feared for their safety, this triggers governmental immunity protection. We need more transparency. We need more accountability. But more important than anything is the national issue of equality under the law. When certain people in our society can break the law with impunity and regular citizens are required to obey the law, there is a disparity there that has to be addressed. This is probably about the 20th time I've been to the Stewart residence.
This is a list of all of the evidence collected so far on the case. These are all bullet fragments or shell casings.
We were able to recover 54 of the bullets that were fired. The police recovered 31. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got them all. By being able to determine deflection angles, penetrations, calibers of bullets, different weapons that were used, we were able to reconstruct this crime scene almost as if we were here videotaping it at the time. The police state their position and their account was that the suspect stuck a gun around the corner, ambushed them, opened fire, and shot Officer Grogan in the face, and he fell into the floor in the bathroom. The physical evidence disproves all of that. The evidence shows that Stewart put his arm out at least that far. Officer Grogan actually had fired the first 2 rounds that were fired. The very first shot hit Matt in the arm. From the angle of the wound, there is no way that Matthew David Stewart could have been pointing the gun at the officers when he was hit. An officer fired 2 rounds from the kitchen. This was one of the 2 bullets. The other bullet traveled in this small space, the clearing between that wall and this wall and this wall. Officer Grogan was in this position firing. The bullet entered here, it went through his face, it splattered blood on the door. If we calculated it right, the bullet would have fallen all the way to right here, and I should be able to reach in here and pull out a slug. Perfect. Does that look good? Perfect. This is a .40 caliber bullet. Matt was firing a 9mm Beretta. So the bullet doesn't match anything that Matt was firing. But look how distorted it is. That is the kind of distortion you get when you strike bone, when you strike a mass. In all probability, this bullet has DNA evidence from Officer Grogan's face. This would prove positively that Officer Grogan was shot by friendly fire.
Well, I guess as far as a possibility of friendly fire, you can never rule anything out. I mean, you always hear the term anything's possible, but you gotta look at it as probable. In this situation, where everybody was positioned and where people were taking aim and firing, I don't see where there was a possibility of friendly fire.
With it being such a chaotic scene and people were shooting and people were doing this, it's a surprise that no one did get shot accidentally by another officer. That is a surprise. And I think that just goes to speak volumes for our the training we have.
Now, Matt Stewart fires down the hallway. Bam, bam. They have fired 30 rounds at him and hit him once. He fires 2 rounds. He hears them and hears them going out into the carport area. He moves forward. This is dangerous because he's now, for the first time, exposing himself. And at this point, he fires a clearing round up through the ceiling. This is a typical military tactical maneuver. He's got him on the run. He's now on the aggressive. Stewart is moving down the hall, and Frankham is here. Stewart fires 2 shots from here. Frankham is in this position. The bullets travel through his arms, hands area, strikes his chest. Frankham is trying to get up and get out, and they're helping him and dragging him. And at this point, Stewart, the suspect, moves forward. Stewart continues to fire. But this is the place where Frankham was fatally shot. Stewart retreats back to the back bedroom, slits this screen, and bails out the window onto the awning at the back of the house. Stewart took a position prone inside the shed out back. The police opened fire on the shed and they fired 60 rounds.
Hello, the window? Yeah, he jumped out the back window. It's in the shed!
5 rounds went through the shed and struck the residence to the south. 10 of those rounds went through the house, the shed, the fence, and struck the second house down. So the whole neighborhood was impacted with bullets flying everywhere.
My littlest girl, she probably doesn't appreciate me saying this, but she was laying on the floor and she was so scared that she couldn't get up. She laid there in Peter pants because she was too afraid to get up and go to the bathroom.
Stewart was hit and hurt, and the officers approached him and subdued him.
Put your hands up! Put your hands up!
10 bullets came through that fence and apparently hit this house. So what I want to do is to start over here and just really carefully search all the way over to the bushes over there, that tree. From that tree over here, just as carefully as we can. A good investigator would never have left the evidence that was left at this crime scene. In the final analysis, in this particular scene, there's only two conclusions that we can come to. One is the CSI team, the police investigators who conducted the investigation, were either incompetent or there was a cover-up.
Stewart shot 26 rounds from his 9mm pistol inside the house. Of those 26 rounds, 17 of those rounds hit police officers. 3 of those 17 hit police officers in the head. Nate Hutchison has undergone 4 surgeries on his right arm. He had metal hardware put in his arm. Kevin Grogan also had a significant amount of surgery on his jaw and teeth. Kasey Burrell was shot in the head. He had major surgery on his abdomen. He had an ileostomy or colostomy for a while, and they had to put him back together. Runkles had a very significant injury. That bullet is still lodged in his neck. He has a significant potentiality for problems if they try to get it out. Jared was hit 7 times. He was shot in the left arm. He was shot in the abdomen. He was shot in the left chest. He was shot in the left femur. The lethal wound was the penetrating gunshot wound of the right medial upper back that struck his spinal cord at T5, that entered his lung and caused a lot of hemorrhage in the lung, which was they tried to surgically repair and they couldn't do. Let's remember who brought the violence to whom. These officers didn't go in and start shooting at Mr. Stewart. That's not what happened here. The reality is Mr. Stewart didn't have to shoot at anybody. When one looks at this objectively, I don't think there's any evidence that supports the defense theory that he acted somehow in self-defense. Everything about this case proves, in my judgment, beyond reasonable doubt, that Matthew Stewart set about to kill police officers.
Those are the ones I feel go through my hair.
You know, these guys are doing such a wonderful work for our society and for our kids, doing something that nobody else wants to do. I wish it never had to happen to any of them. You know, these guys need to go home at night with their families just like the rest of us do. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that doesn't happen. We're grateful, though, to the officers. You know, they truly are our heroes, each one of them. We just love them to death. They did their very best, you know, in a really difficult situation.
And they did what they'd been trained to do.
They did a lot of heroic things. And unfortunately, it was his number and time to go home, but he did what he was supposed to as well.
And he always wanted to be a cop, so we were really proud of him.
Yep. There's no more honorable profession on this earth, in my opinion.
He was just a pleasant kid to be around. He was a solid police officer.
Yes, you still have the open ear, the helping hand. He'll always have a smile on his face. Denny Lawrence.
My Uncle Denny was my hero. I grew up admiring him, respecting him. I kind of patterned my life after him. He was a police officer. My brother-in-law is a police officer. My brother's a police officer. I became a police officer. He got a call on the radio to an accident. It was a traffic accident on the side of the highway there near a rest stop. He had run off the road and smashed into a pole, and it wasn't a bad accident, didn't look that bad, but he was appeared to be hurt. And then he walked up, got out of his patrol car, walked up to this gentleman who was covered with a blanket, and all of a sudden the guy threw back the blanket, bam. The bullet entered right above Uncle Denny's eye in his forehead. It was a .22 caliber bullet. It pierced the skull and went back into his brain and lodged in the back of his brain. They said he probably would not survive. He did. They said that they could not take the bullet out of his head because if they operated and removed it, it would cause so much damage to brain tissue that he would be a vegetable. The bullet stayed, and Uncle Denny recovered. He was never supposed to walk. He couldn't talk. And eventually he died of lead poisoning from the bullet to his brain. I have great respect and admiration for the law enforcement profession and for officers who lay their lives on the line on a daily basis, who protect and serve, who do their best to keep us safe.
It all began December 20th at about 2:30 a.m. My eldest daughter, which stays in that bedroom over there, come downstairs and told me that she heard noises banging in her closet. And I grabbed a baseball bat and I came upstairs. And, you know, I looked out her window towards the back door, or towards the back, and I didn't hear anything, and they're still just constantly banging. So I'm yelling at this point, you know, asking, who is it? Who is it? What do you want? And I'm not getting any response. So by this time I can tell it's coming from the front door. So I continue, who is it? I'm not getting any response. And then faintly I hear Ogden City Police, and I wait a second, and then they pound again. So I grab my bat and I open the door, and there they were with all their rifles just pointed in my face, and they're, oh yeah, and they, you know, guns drawn, LED lights on me, and they tell me, you know, drop the bat. So just like that, I just drop the bat, you know, and they say, with your left hand, open the screen. So I opened the screen, and there was a cop blindside to me. So as soon as I walked forward, he grabbed me and placed me in handcuffs and held me and told me to face the street. And there's no cop cars anywhere. They said, who else is in the house? And I said, my wife and my kids are downstairs, scared out of their minds. What is going on? And the officer that had me in handcuffs makes a nod like that, and officers go inside.
So while that's happening with him, I'm downstairs with the kids in bed, not knowing what's going on. I couldn't really hear. All I could hear was commotion. I didn't know the police were in my house. I didn't know he was in handcuffs. So I tell my kids, stay in bed, I'll be right back. So I grab my phone. I have 911 dialed on my phone. As I'm walking across the downstairs laundry room, I'm met by a police officer on my stairs with his gun drawn on me.
A rifle or pistol?
I think it was a rifle.
It was an assault rifle.
No, it was an assault rifle.
They
So
call
immediately
patrol.
my hands go up. I'm like, what is going on? And I can't really tell he's a police officer. It was tactical gear. I didn't really, I couldn't see any indication he was a police officer. He never identified himself. And so he tells me, come upstairs. I'm coming upstairs and my girls follow behind me. She's crying. I'm holding her. When I came back up, I was, what is going on? What do you guys want? What do you want? And they just wouldn't answer us for the longest time. They wouldn't say what they were there for. Finally, he said, we believe that he's AWOL from the military. My husband's never been in the military.
Well, that's when I keep telling him, my name is Eric Hill, and he says, no, your name's Derek. You
Yeah.
keep calling me Derek. I says, no, I'm not Derek. And, I'm telling him, I've never been in the military. I have no idea what you're talking about. That's what I said. I said, the truck parked out there in the driveway is registered to my name. And the officer that had me in handcuffs has another officer go out there and read the plates. That's when they realized they made a mistake.
They were just like, oh, sorry, have a good night. Or try to have a Merry Christmas. He looked at my Christmas tree as he was walking out.
And as he was walking out, he sees my baseball bat there on the ground where he told me to drop it. And he picks it up and spins it in his hand a couple times and looks and says, Louisville Slugger, huh? And I was like, yeah. And he says, well, you're lucky you came up with that and not one of your rifles or I'd have wasted you. And what if I did come and answer the door with a shotgun? I had every right to. And the only reason I didn't is because my daughter was right there and I didn't want to scare her any more than she already was.
I just couldn't imagine, walking upstairs and maybe seeing my husband dead on the floor in our own home, trying to protect his family.
In 1975, I founded the SWAT team in Davis County when I was county sheriff. And in September 22nd of 2008, the SWAT team killed my son-in-law. The whole idea of the SWAT team was to avoid death and injury. What I'm seeing since I left law enforcement is a major change in the mentality and the way things are done.
They've lost connection of serving the people and keeping us safe, and they're just so quick to shoot.
To see the SWAT team that I founded kill my son-in-law, I know what it feels like to be a victim.
This is the 8th hour of the standoff, and the word that we're getting from police is that they say they will be here as long as it takes to get a peaceful resolution out of this situation.
They had big floodlights on Brian. It was now starting to get dark. They said he has not had any water. He has not had any food. He has been up for hours and hours and hours. They said he can barely stand up. They said he's just going to fall down from exhaustion, and then this is going to be over. So we're not going to do anything aggressive. And it was only a few minutes after that then all hell broke loose.
They placed a phone call, and he answered the phone, held it to his left ear, gun to his chest, and they said 3, 2, 1. Initiate. They fired 2 40-millimeter impact rounds. One hit him in the back of the elbow, and the other hit him in the tricep. The gun that he had held all afternoon fell to the ground and stopped right at the corner of the trailer. He is in this location here, and down behind the trailer, and he is tased through the fence, through a loose board, in the buttocks. So he was tased continuously for 50 seconds. As he was writhing on the ground, according to the SWAT officers who witnessed, some of them said, he was crying out, he was screaming or pleading, he was saying, okay, 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 stop shooting at me, stop tasing me. Another officer got a little bit overzealous and touched off a .45 caliber round. And the bullet hits the back of his skull and ricocheted into the headlamp of his dad's truck. when he was hit in the head, he went down, and he bled profusely on the ground here. He's still alive. Instead of subduing him and restraining him and cuffing him, what they did is waited and tossed flashbangs. 6 of them detonated on his body. They detonated him on his butt. They detonated him on his sides and his kidneys. They detonated him between his open hands, empty hands behind his neck as he lay on the ground. He was not a threat. He had no weapon. He was incapacitated. He was already down. He was not capable of firing or injuring or hurting anybody at the moment the fatal shot was fired.
He is down. Shot fired. He is down. Prepare for medical. Move in. Stand by. We're going to secure him.
I'll move to the position where the fatal shot was fired. The officer was actually in this position right here with a .308 sniper rifle. The bullet is fired inside the wheel, underneath the white Jeep that was parked here. It entered his left cheek. It went down his throat and out his upper right back. The fatal shot is fired 5 minutes and 33 seconds after the initial attack begins.
2 officers came over and asked my wife and myself to come with them, and they took us over to a secluded area and told us that that Brian had shot himself, and they moved their hand in the gesture that he had shot himself in the heart.
All I remember them telling me is he didn't make it. And then everything was just a big fog.
Well, this standoff lasted for nearly 12 hours, but negotiators were not able to talk the armed man into giving up. Just less than an hour ago, the suspect shot himself.
And that's the way they gave it to the press. And that's the story they maintained for 20 hours. They said that he committed suicide. It was a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest. That was not true. There was no gunshot injury to the chest of any kind.
I'm good. You guys good?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, we all good? Okay, appreciate you getting here tonight, and we appreciate also your patience and help letting us take time to get together this information so that we can give you a more accurate picture of the events that unfolded last night. As it got to a point last evening, approximately 9:30 to 9:45, we felt any progress with the negotiations and made another attempt to safely bring him into custody with less lethal methods, which included flashbang grenades, baton rounds, pepper ball rounds, and at the conclusion of that, it was forced into a deadly force situation with an officer forced to use deadly force on the subject, resulting in his death.
Did he have a weapon in his hand when the officer fired that shot?
Yes.
How many shots were fired?
1 by the officer.
He is down. Shot fired. He is down. Prepare for medical. Move in. Stand by. We're going to secure him.
This is the shooter. He remains standing right where he fired from, behind the Jeep. Notice he's not in SWAT uniform. He's in a regular police uniform. He doesn't have a helmet. He has no protective gear. He's supposed to be wearing glasses for night vision. He doesn't have his glasses on. He's been there at the scene all day long for 12 hours. He just began to realize what he's just done. Psychologically, he was totally unprepared for that.
I have compassion for him because this is something he has to live with. And I wouldn't want to be in his shoes and have to live with, you know, having to make a decision, a split-second decision, and take someone's life and second guess, you know, that. I mean, I think that would be a difficult life sentence for him.
Officers that have to take somebody's life
give up a part of themselves forever. There's a piece of them that's gone. There's no getting it back. You can talk about it all day long, you know, when we do interviews. Are you ready? Could you take someone's life if you have to? That's a question we pose in interviews. We have to know. And you can see sometimes in new recruits, oh yeah, I can do that. And in the back of your mind, especially if you've been doing it for a while, you think, well, I hope you mean it. Because once you've done it, things are different. Nobody enjoys this. Nobody wants to be in this position. Nobody ever wants to be responsible for the loss of someone's life.
My father served in the Army Air Corps. I served in the Marine Corps, and Matthew and my other son Nathan both served in the Army and the Airborne. They both were jumping out of airplanes. And this is basically the ribbons and medals that Matthew had received. I understood that this may have been knocked off the wall and somebody walked over it and damaged it, and so we put it back together. The way they viewed him and what they claim he did, and that they were just very abusive to him. For a year and a half to be in a little 10-foot cell and be deprived of sunlight and caged like an animal, ultimately, I think he knew about the system and how unfair the system is. They're responsible for his death. That's my opinion.
We're here this morning to address the death of Matthew Stewart. Early this morning at approximately 12:50 a.m., a correctional officer was doing a routine hourly cell check when she discovered Matthew Stewart unresponsive and hanging from a bed sheet inside his jail cell. It was determined that he was deceased.
He wrote a lot of postcards. The only thing that they would let you do in communicating to and from the jail is with these postcards.
Dearest Sister Erna, I think that you should fight for what you believe in. What is most important to you. Right now, it is to be heard. So whisper. If they don't listen, speak up.
And if I still got no reaction, then I should yell. Well, this is me yelling. In anger, and in grief, and in pain. We are here to congregate and honor and respect and remember Matthew Stewart. And we are going to have a silent vigil / demonstration and walking down to Dee Smith's house so he can join us in filling in our grief.
Dee Smith held a press conference actually the day of Matt's passing, just pushing his agenda and not really giving us a day to just grieve. So we didn't even have a chance to tell all of his family members what had happened yet. We thought that Dee Smith needed to understand that we were a grieving family.
Matthew Stewart fired a total of 31 shots that night. 17 of them struck police officers.
Those who are left in the wake of all of this, the family members and the friends, have just severe distrust of police officers. They allege, by and large, in these types of situations, that police officers are lying to them, that county attorneys and attorney general and others are lying. People become very jaded and do not trust the police officers as protectors. They see them as violators of their liberty.
There is so much at risk because in even one instance in which an officer-involved shooting is problematic, the impact to the public's perception of their safety is so great that we cannot afford that.
The mindset is changing, and instead of seeking to be a part of the community and seeking to protect the community, it's the community is against us, and we're here to fight them, and we're here to almost wipe them out, to control.
People have to understand that we're not fighting the same people we fought back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, whatever. It's a whole new class of people. We have to stay one step ahead of them. And if that means coming to the fight with a little bit bigger vest and a little bit bigger gun, so be it.
Militarizing the police undermines public confidence in law enforcement. It makes people fear the police, and it makes people not trust the police when the police think of the communities that they're supposed to serve as an enemy. And when you have a situation in which the people fear or don't trust the police, that undermines public safety. We don't want people to think that the police are an occupying force in their neighborhoods.
You can go to a community and ask a person a simple question. Should we call the cops? And in some communities, they'll look you in the eye and laugh and say, hell no.
We near his house, and he's got his whole front lawn lined with off-duty police officers and strike force agents.
I thought he was a total coward for committing suicide, because I was relishing the day to see the needle put into his arm and him die from the death penalty. I'm telling you right now, because once we went to a jury trial, I don't care who you are or what your stance is, once it is laid out there and you go by the facts, the decision will be made. I guarantee you he would have got the death penalty. I guarantee you I would have been waiting until he actually was executed, and I would have waited until he died. He took a shortcut, didn't want to stand trial, didn't want to do anything, and I think that speaks volumes because it finally set in that he realized what he had done, and the consequences finally caught up to him. And he couldn't live with it, and he killed himself.
That was the agreement with Mrs. Stewart. You're going to follow the agreement. What? Keep him going? Down around the corner, it'll take you right back up. Okay. Thank you.
Nobody got into this to be a cop, or they shouldn't have. They should get into this to be a peace officer. The objective of our entire profession is to bring peace. Sometimes peace is purchased with violence. Not violence that we want or sought or enjoy, but the fact of the matter is sometimes peace is paid for with a price. And that, unfortunately, sometimes is people's lives.
The last 4 years have been perhaps the toughest of my entire life. I have used my flying to escape from the stresses and the pressures. You can get away within 10 or 15 minutes. We can be flying over terrain that has no signs of civilization. I can fly over the Great Salt Lake. I often land on remote islands in the middle of the Great Salt Lake. There's more freedom in the sky by myself in a single-engine aircraft than any other place I've ever found on Earth. My name is William J. Dub Lawrence. I was elected county sheriff of Davis County in 1974. On the 22nd of September 2008, the very SWAT team that I founded in the 1970s killed my son-in-law in my presence as I defended them to his father and his mother and my children, promising them that these men were trained and professional and knew what they were doing. It does not appear that the police are going to change unless they are shown that this is an error This is wrong. I'm going to inform people wherever I can, however I can, and by whatever media I can. So I sit here having gone the full gamut. I'm telling you we're on the wrong track. We need to go back and restore some of what was intended in that doctrine that we hold so sacred as our Constitution. I don't think mankind is equipped to tolerate injustice forever. Somehow, if we can have some kind of closure, some kind of, hopefully we can be big enough to forgive. Hopefully the truth can cut its way to the surface.
It is the conclusion of the Salt Lake County DA's office that the shooting that resulted in the death of Daniel Willard on November 2, 2012 by Detective Kevin Salmon and Sean Collier was not justified.
All we've done today is open the door. We've just opened the door so that our case can be heard in a court of law.
It seems to be the only avenue that I have that I can speak out and say, this is wrong. How do you get their attention if you don't sue them?
I wouldn't really say Utah is unique, at least not that I've noticed. You know, the one thing I have noticed about Utah that I think is definitely different is that there does seem to be some mounting opposition to this, organized opposition even.
I have been silent for almost 5 years. I would like to lend my support and to begin speaking publicly to bring about some changes.
Hey, Sheriff, we have a question about why your office, your intelligence division, is investigating private citizens for criminal investigation that happen to be activists that are overseeing your department. Why would you have your intelligence division investigate private citizens? We have done...
for life hating so much.
Sir, we don't hate anyone. We love freedom and we love American people. And government is out of control. That's why you're seeing such a revolt nationwide. Why can't you just answer, why is Susan Edwards, your intelligence division, investigating private citizens? This should not happen.
Are you here to apply for a job?
Possibly I might be applying for a job, but that's irrelevant to my question. Why would you ask that question?
Well, enjoy the fair.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Excuse you?
Excuse me, sir.
So those of you that haven't
Wow.
been on a bike before,
Sheriff's getting a little too pushy. You work for us, Sheriff. Just keep that in mind. At one time we respected you, but not with that type of attitude.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County Cop Watch, and I wanted to explain what fair use is. You can use pieces of news articles if you're doing it for news reporting, you have commentary, and you're doing it for education purposes. So that's what fair use is, as you can see right here. Another reason why I wanted to make this video is to let you know I have just joined with Patreon. A nice thing with Patreon, I make no money on YouTube. They took the money away years ago, and so this is another way to give, and it's a nice thing too because you can give monthly. You can give $1, $5, $10, whatever. I do 4 to 5 hours a day on trying to wake the sheeple up on how corrupt it is and different ways that you can fight the corruption. So Patreon is a way that you can do it, and then of course the old way is still there. Donate to Charlotte County Cop Watch with PayPal or credit card. So keep that in mind. 4 to 5 hours a day. I make no money, but the corruption happened to me and I'm sick of it, so I'm trying to wake people up. But my wife would love it if if we could get some help out there. There's 47,000 subscribers. Just think if each one of you subscribers just gave a let's say, actually, yes, $1 a month. 47,000 subscribers gave $1 a month. That would be awesome. That's not going to happen. But anyways, that would be great if it did happen. But, you know, do the math in your head. Just think about it. Like I said, 4 to 5 hours a day. I get no money from YouTube. YouTube has gone nuts. You can't do anything anymore. They're taking the money away everywhere. So these are a couple different ways that you can still help out with all this time that I put in. And as you know, I'm in a special situation where, you know, at least I can do it. You know, 4 to 5 hours a day. We have a cleaning company during the day. That's what allows me to do this, and we're debt free. So this is my hobby. I don't go fishing and all that other crap. I try to save the world. So help me out to make the wife happy, man. In fact, if you guys did give $1 a day, and there was 47,000 of you, and you did it, and each of you gave $1, and that was every month, oh my God, yes, I could quit. I could start suing them. Another idea, too, that we have is, you know, if I got, you know, some funds, we could actually contact everyone that has been ticketed and or arrested and put in jail and start sending them postcards to let them know we're here, and to see if everything went all right, and if it didn't, find out their story. So we could even do more investigations and more lawsuits. Lawsuits take money. So just think about that. You know, 47,000 of you so far right now. You know, $1 a day. I mean, $1 a month on Patreon, or $5 a month Patreon, 10, 20, whatever. Just do the math in your head. Help out. This is a lot of work every single day. Thanks.